Do you know how a computer works? According to a study done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, about 74% of U.S. workers use computers on a daily basis at their jobs, and about 81% of U.S. adults use computers at home on a daily basis. That's a lot of people who use computers. Despite that, only a small percentage of them actually know how computers work. In this presentation, I'll be covering how a computer runs and functions and how to build one. I've been working with computers for a good portion of my life, whether it be through programming, building computers and taking them apart, and all sorts of other electronic devices. So it's definitely my passion. This information is useful to you because I can almost guarantee that you use computers on a daily basis. With this information, you will learn a lot more about computers, and you might even be inspired to build one of your own. In this presentation, I'll be covering the basics of how a computer runs, the components of a computer, and how to put a computer together. Now that we've covered the basics, let's move on to how a computer runs. A computer can be split up into two main components, hardware and software. According to an article and explain that stuff, hardware is the physical parts of a computer, and software is the digital collection of instruction and processes of data. To put it simply, hardware is the things that you see when you look at a computer, and the software is what you see when you look at the screen of a computer. The most important piece of software is the operating system on your computer, whether it be Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. It serves as a foundation for all other softwares, and it controls all the main processes. Once that's installed, other processes and other softwares can be installed, like Google Chrome or Microsoft Word. Hardware is all the physical things, and they all serve different purposes, but they're all very important. When everything works together like that, it supports the operating system and gets the computer to work the right way. Now that we know that, let's focus more on the hardware part of a computer. Information gathered from ID Tech shows that there are 5 main components to a computer. So to start with, there's the motherboard. The motherboard acts as a hub for the computer, and it connects all the different components together, and it's impossible to build a computer without one. The central processing unit, or CPU, acts as a brain for the computer, and it does all the calculations, processes, and other forms of data and tasks. The random access memory, or RAM, makes startups and shutdowns quicker on your computer by storing frequently accessed data in a short-term memory. Storage on your computer, in the form of a hard disk drive or a solid-state drive, is used to store data and all other information on a computer. Lastly, the power supply unit, or PSU, is used to provide power throughout the computer, as the name implies. Now that we know the main components, we're ready to build a computer. The build order for a computer starts with the CPU and sticks of RAM, and you attach it to the motherboard. But you do this outside of the computer because it could be way too crammed when you try to do it inside of the case, so you have a lot more open area to do it outside. After that, you put in the power supply unit first, and then the motherboard, and then the storage system afterwards. Once that's all in there, the computer is ready to go, and anything else added to it is extra and is not actually required. To get a better understanding, let's look at an actual computer case. In this case, the motherboard is right here, this area, with all these cables and cords connected to it. These cables provide power and all sorts of data going through all the different components to work together. Right here is the CPU cooler. While not required in every computer, a CPU cooler cools off the CPU when it's doing heavy tasks like doing hard processes and things like that that might get it too hot. CPU cooler cools it off, as the name implies. Underneath of it is the CPU, which attaches directly to the motherboard. Right beside it here are 2 RAM slots, and to use them, I'm going to be using these 2 sticks of RAM, which add up to 8 gigabytes. When you use them, you open up the slots like this on both sides, and then you take the stick, you line it up with the slots, and you push it in until it clicks. And you do the same thing for the other stick. Line it up, and then click. And then over here, we have the hard drive, which uses the storage for all of it. And up on top here, there's an optical drive, which is used for CDs and DVDs. This is not required in all computers, but it is in this one, so it can be used here. As you can see on the front, this is where the tray would come out, and the CDs and DVDs can be inserted. Down here is the power supply unit, which provides power throughout all the components in the computer. And the cables, there's a lot of cables down here. If you actually turn the computer around, you can see where all the cables are routed through the backside here. And there's a lot of them here, and I'm not going to cover it in this presentation. I'm going to focus more on the other hardware aspects of it. The last thing to cover in this part of the case is this section right here, which is the video card slot. Now, this is what a video card looks like for this case. And the video card is used to do 3D processes and graphics and imaging, whether it's used in video games or renderings and sorts of things. It's not required in every computer, but if you're doing those sorts of things, it's definitely required. To insert it, similar to RAM, you unclip the clasp, slide it into place here until it clicks, and then you'll screw it in, and it's a lot easier to screw it in when it's on the side, so that's what I'm going to be doing. When you screw it in, you just have to make sure everything's aligned properly and it's screwed in tightly, and then once it's in place, the graphics card can be seen on the outside of the case, on the side here, where you can plug in video cables like an HDMI cable to connect to your monitor, so you can actually see what's going on. Now we've basically covered all the main components of a computer, and it can be ready to run. So afterwards, you just put the sides of the case together, and it's all done. To recap, we've learned that there are hardware and software in a computer that are used together to make it run well. On top of that, there are multiple hardware components that all have different functions, and some are more important than others, but they all have a task to make it run properly. We also learned that installing a piece of hardware can be fairly simple when you follow guides and steps and instructions. This was a brief rundown on all this information, so if you're interested in it, I encourage you to do more information and research on your own. A study done by the American Community Survey Reports shows that the number of households with electronic computers increases every year and has increased dramatically in the last decade. With the information you've learned today, you know a lot more than most people do about computers, because despite that number growing, the number of people who actually know how a computer works still remains a small amount. So with this information, you are much more ahead in a world that has become much more computerized.